Ladies and gentlemen, we live in an age obsessed with the question, who am I? We ask it through selfies, slogans, and search engines. But I submit to you today that we are asking the wrong question, or at least asking it too soon. Because you cannot truly know who you are until you first understand whose you are. Many are adrift in life, not from a lack of ambition, but from a lack of anchor. They chase success, approval, image, and freedom, only to feel more lost than ever. We were told, look within yourself to find your truth, but what if what's inside you is confused, hurt, or incomplete? What if your inner compass is spinning wildly because it's disconnected from true north? Let me tell you a truth not popular in modern thinking, but ancient in wisdom. You did not invent yourself. You were crafted, deliberately, lovingly, and with purpose. A painting does not know its worth by gazing into a mirror. It discovers its value only when the painter steps forward and says, "This is my masterpiece." In the same way, you cannot define your worth by social media likes, career status, or peer approval. You must discover it by reconnecting with the one who made you. Now, some might say, but that's too restrictive. I want to be free to choose who I am. Freedom is beautiful, but freedom without foundation is not liberty. It's loneliness. It's like a ship unmoored in open sea, celebrating its drifting until the storm comes. Real freedom comes not from denying your origin, but from embracing it. When you know whose you are, when you realize that your life was spoken into existence for a reason, you stop trying to prove yourself. You start living with purpose. You stop comparing and start contributing. You stop pretending and start becoming. This is not fantasy. This is reality grounded in something higher than passing trends or personal moods. It is rooted in the unchanging truth that you were made with love, for love by love himself. So today, don't just ask who am I, ask whose am I, and when you find that answer, everything else, your identity, your values, your calling, will begin to fall into place. In a world that celebrates personal invention, we've been told that we can be anything, do anything, and define ourselves however we please. And while this message feels empowering on the surface, it has quietly left many people exhausted, anxious, and uncertain. Why? Because constructing your identity from scratch is a burden too great for any human to bear. The very idea that you must invent yourself assumes you are alone in the task of defining your value, your purpose, and your direction. And yet, deep down, most people know something isn't right. If identity were truly self-created, why do we feel most like ourselves when we are loved, known, and connected to someone greater than us? It is here that we confront a powerful truth. Identity is not a product of self-expression, but of self-discovery. You were not meant to conjure up your worth in isolation, but to uncover it through relationship with your origin. The difference is subtle, but life-changing. One view says, I must create my truth. The other says, I must seek the truth to understand who I already am. And that second way, though it requires humility, leads to clarity and peace. When we base our identity solely on our feelings or achievements, it becomes fragile. Feelings change, circumstances shift. What once made us feel valuable can be taken from us in a moment. A job lost, a relationship broken, a dream delayed. If your identity is built on sand, you will constantly scramble to rebuild it every time life changes. But if your identity is discovered, rooted in something greater than yourself, it can weather every storm. Think about how a tree grows. It doesn't declare, I am an oak, and force itself into becoming one. It grows into what it already is, because it comes from an acorn that holds its design. Likewise, our true identity is not something we invent. It is something we uncover through growth and alignment with the design that was already placed in us. That design points back to a designer, and when we ignore the designer, we lose the blueprint for who we really are. This is why so many people feel hollow even after achieving everything they thought would complete them. They climbed the ladder of success only to realize it was leaning against the wrong wall. They chased an image of themselves rather than their actual essence. They pursued recognition before understanding where they belonged, and without belonging, even our best accomplishments ring hollow. Modern culture offers many counterfeit identities. It tells you that your job title defines you, or your number of followers, or your political views, or your attractiveness, but those are roles, costumes even useful in context, but never meant to define the soul. You are not your resume. You are not your profile. You are not your performance. So what are you? That answer can only be found by going back to the one who made you. This is not blind faith. It's the opposite. It is seeing clearly for the first time that your life is not a random burst of energy, but a carefully written sentence in a much greater story. Your job is not to write yourself into existence, but to read the script that has already been etched into your being. You were never meant to ask, "What can I pretend to be?" but rather, "What was I made for?" And when that question is asked sincerely, it doesn't lead to restriction, but liberation. You become free from the pressure to perform, free from the need to compare, free from the exhausting chase to prove your value, because your value was never a prize to be earned. It was a truth to be accepted. In truth, the self is too sacred a thing to be made up on the spot. It is not a collage of opinions or desires or moods. It is the echo of something eternal, and you will only hear that echo when you get still enough to ask not just who am I, but whose am I? Until then, you will be like a person holding a masterpiece and calling it a blank canvas. But once you know the artist's signature is already there, you begin to see yourself as you truly are, not by invention, but by revelation. Once we understand that identity is not something we manufacture, but something we discover, we are faced with a deeper question: where does this discovery happen? And the answer, though often overlooked, is this: identity is revealed in the context of belonging. Before a person can become who they are meant to be, they must first know where, and to whom, they belong. Without belonging, identity is like a seed with no soil, full of potential but unable to grow. From childhood, we learn to define ourselves by the people we belong to. A child knows herself first as a daughter, a son, a sibling, long before she knows herself as an artist or a leader. These relationships form the soil in which the early roots of identity grow. But when belonging is damaged or unclear, when people are abandoned, rejected, or told that they are only valuable if they perform, it creates confusion. It teaches them that they must earn their place in the world. And so they strive to become something without ever feeling grounded in anyone or anything. They chase titles, talents, and applause, hoping these things will tell them who they are. But it doesn't work, not sustainably, because you cannot grow a healthy identity in the soil of insecurity. This is why people today are so desperate to be seen, known, and accepted. Beneath the noise of ambition lies a silent question: do I matter to anyone? And until that question is answered, no amount of success can satisfy. You can fill your days with activity and your walls with awards, but if your heart does not feel anchored in something greater than your accomplishments, you will always feel like a stranger to yourself. Belonging answers that question, not by saying you've earned a place, but by saying you have a place. You are not tolerated, you are chosen. You are not competing to be enough. You are already enough in the eyes of the one who made you. That kind of belonging is not performance-based, it is identity-based. It doesn't wait for you to achieve greatness. It tells you that your existence is already meaningful. And here lies the paradox of purpose. The more you try to become, Without knowing where you belong, the further you drift from your true self, because becoming is not about constructing an impressive version of yourself. It's about unfolding into the person you were always meant to be. And unfolding takes time, trust, and roots. We see this truth reflected in nature. A branch does not bear fruit unless it abides in the tree. It draws its life and power not from striving, but from connection. The same is true for us. When we are disconnected from our source, when we live apart from the one we belong to, we become dry, anxious, and overextended. We put all our energy into doing because we have no security in being. Belonging is not just emotional comfort, it is spiritual necessity. We were made to live from a place of connection. When you know you are already loved, already chosen, already held, you no longer strive to prove yourself to the world. You begin to live out of peace, not pressure. That peace becomes the foundation for everything else, your relationships, your decisions, your resilience. And make no mistake, knowing whose you are doesn't erase life's hardships. But it does change the way you face them. When storms come, people who have no sense of belonging often collapse inward. But those who are rooted in something greater, those who know they are not alone and not random, stand stronger. Their identity is not shaken by temporary loss or failure, because it was never based on those things to begin with. Their worth is not tied to outcomes, it is tied to origin. This is why we must begin with belonging. The world tells you to go find yourself, but the wiser path is to first return to where you were always known. When you understand whose you are, you begin to see who you really are, not as an image to maintain, but as a truth to live from. And only then, only when the soul is grounded in belonging, does becoming make any sense at all. Because the question is no longer, what can I achieve to prove myself? But rather, how can I live out what's already been placed in me? That is where true identity begins, not with striving, but with knowing that you were never alone to begin with. Once we accept that identity is not self, manufactured but discovered, and that discovery begins with belonging, the natural next step is to ask, where does that belonging come from? It is not enough to feel connected to people or ideas. True belonging comes from knowing you were created intentionally, and this brings us to a vital truth, one that anchors everything else. We are not accidents, we are authored. The idea that we are authored stands in sharp contrast to the modern narrative that life is random, that we are here by chance, and that meaning must be invented because none existed to begin with. But if that were true, if we are merely a product of time and probability, then meaning becomes a fragile illusion, and deep down most people know that's not enough. We crave something more than coincidence. We long to believe we were planned, that someone meant us to be here. Think about it. When you hold a handwritten letter, you treat it differently than a scrap of paper. Why? Because the letter carries intention. It was crafted with purpose, every word chosen with care. It didn't happen by accident. It came from someone's heart, mind, and vision. In the same way, your life is not random ink spilled across a page. You are a message written on purpose by a mind far greater than yours. This realization changes everything. If you are authored, then your life has meaning even before you achieve anything. You don't become valuable because of what you do. You are valuable because of who wrote you. This truth uproots the performance-based mindset our culture celebrates. It frees us from the treadmill of endless validation. Because if the author has already approved your worth, no human applause or rejection can add or subtract from it. And yet, most people live as if they are editing their own story, unsure of the plot and constantly rewriting their role. They try on different personalities like outfits, hoping one will finally feel right. They copy trends, mimic voices, follow crowds, desperate to write something convincing, but that never works. It only deepens the confusion, because you can't write a story that makes sense until you know how it began. And our story didn't begin with us. To be authored means you were imagined before you were born. Your life was not just started, it was designed. Your strengths, your dreams, even your wounds, they are not meaningless. They are threads in a greater narrative. The author doesn't waste pages. What feels random to us is often intentional from a higher perspective. What seems like failure or delay may be part of the development arc written for your growth. That doesn't mean every event is good, but it does mean everything can be used for good, because an author who is both wise and loving doesn't write to impress. He writes to reveal something beautiful, even through tension and pain. The most meaningful stories always include hardship, but in the hands of the author, even the broken chapters serve a purpose. This view of life is not naive, it is realistic in the deepest sense. It allows us to face suffering without losing hope. It reminds us that we are not alone in trying to make sense of things. There is a writer greater than us who sees the full plot, even when we are lost in the middle of a paragraph. And if he wrote us, then he sees us. And if he sees us, then we are never forgotten, even when we feel invisible. But this truth also carries a responsibility. If you are authored, then you are not the final authority. Your life is not just yours to use however you please. It was given to you as a gift, and gifts come with a calling, not one forced by pressure, but one born of purpose. You were not written to copy others. You were written to live out your unique paragraph in the story of the world. So instead of asking, "What do I want my life to say?" the better question is, "What has already been written into me?" That's where peace is found, not in creating a louder story, but in living out the one that was always meant to be yours. Because when you accept that you are authored, you begin to see that every part of your life, even the parts you didn't choose, can be meaningful. And only then, grounded in authorship, do you begin to walk in your identity with humility and confidence, not trying to prove that you matter, but living as someone who already does. Once we recognize that we are not accidents but authored, we begin to realize that our lives are not just filled with random moments, but marked by intention. And this understanding leads to the next foundational truth. Purpose flows from origin. Just as identity begins with belonging and authorship, purpose begins with understanding where and from whom you come. A created thing only makes sense when it is understood in relation to its creator. A tool designed for precision cannot be judged by how well it paints a wall. A violin is not a failure because it cannot hammer a nail. Its purpose is directly connected to its design, and so it is with us. The reason so many people feel purposeless is not because they lack talent or drive, it's because they are trying to define their purpose apart from their origin. They are attempting to live meaningful lives without reference to the one who authored them. When you try to define your purpose without knowing your source, you are like a character trying to rewrite the story without ever reading the first chapter. You make assumptions. You imitate others. You follow the loudest voices in culture, but deep down something doesn't fit. The roles you play may impress others, but they don't satisfy the soul, because you weren't designed to live someone else's story. You were created for a purpose that is unique to your origin, your wiring, your experience, and your calling. This is why comparison is so dangerous. When you forget your origin, you begin to measure your life by other people's standards. You think your purpose must look like theirs, the same success, the same lifestyle, the same achievements, but they weren't authored with your story in mind. Their path was never meant to replace yours. Trying to live out someone else's calling is like trying to wear someone else's skin. It may look good for a moment, but it's exhausting and eventually suffocating. Purpose only becomes clear when you stop performing and start listening to the quiet truths placed in you by the one who knows your full design, and discovering that purpose is not a dramatic moment of sudden revelation. It is usually a gradual unfolding. You learn by paying attention. You learn by aligning. When you return to your origin, to the one who knows why you were made, you begin to see patterns. You notice the talents that energize you, the burdens that move you, the values that stay with you no matter what season of life you're in. These things are not random, they are clues, echoes of something written into your soul. And as you respond to those clues with courage and humility, you begin to live out your real purpose, not as an act of performance, but as an act of alignment. Too many people waste their lives chasing productivity instead of purpose. They are always busy, always building, always achieving, but they never stop to ask, does this even fit who I am without purpose? Even our accomplishments feel hollow. We reach milestones that impress others but leave us empty. But when purpose guides your path, even small steps feel significant. Even the quiet seasons feel meaningful, because you're not trying to create importance, you're living from it. This perspective also changes how we view failure. If your purpose is grounded in origin, then setbacks are not signs that your life is off course. They may actually be part of the process. The same author who gave you your design knows how to develop you. And often, growth comes not from ease but from resistance. What feels like delay may be development. What feels like a closed door may be redirection. When you trust your origin, you don't panic when the journey doesn't go as planned. You know the author is still writing. That's the difference between a life driven by fear and a life driven by purpose. One scrambles to stay relevant. The other walks with quiet confidence. One is constantly reacting. The other is responding to a deeper call. But this kind of clarity only comes when we return to our source, because only your origin can tell you why you exist. Culture can suggest, emotions can fluctuate, and people can guess, but only the one who made you knows you well enough to tell you what you were truly made for. When you know where you come from, you start to understand what you're here for. You stop wandering and start walking. You stop imitating and start embodying. You realize that purpose is not something you chase. It's something you live into, one step at a time, by staying rooted in the truth of your origin. As we've traced the journey from identity to belonging, from authorship to purpose, a difficult but necessary realization emerges. Much of the confusion people feel today about who they are, what they're meant to do, and why life often feels hollow, is not merely emotional or psychological. It is spiritual. The fog we walk through in modern life is not caused solely by external chaos, but by internal disconnection, and at the heart of that disconnection is a broken link with the one who gave us our origin, identity, and meaning. You can see the signs of this spiritual confusion everywhere. People are more connected digitally, but more isolated relationally. They have access to more information than ever before, yet feel less certain about what is true. They try to define their identity through lifestyles, labels, and movements, but often end up more divided inside than before. Despite living in a world that claims to empower the individual, many feel powerless, adrift in a sea of options, yet anchored to nothing. This is what happens when the soul is disconnected from its source. When we sever our lives from the deeper spiritual truth of who we belong to, everything starts to blur. It's like cutting a light bulb from its power source and wondering why it doesn't shine. The confusion is not the result of the bulb being faulty. It's simply unplugged. In the same way, many people today are not broken. They are simply disconnected. Disconnected from their creator, from their purpose, and from the quiet inner voice that once spoke truth before the noise of the world drowned it out. Modern culture tries to fill this void with substitutes. It offers self-help instead of surrender, distraction instead of direction, pleasure instead of peace. And while these things might work for a while, they cannot satisfy the deeper questions of the human soul. You can distract yourself from meaninglessness, but you can't heal it without going back to its root. You can build an impressive life on the outside, but if the inside is hollow, the whole structure eventually cracks. This disconnection is not accidental, it's been normalized. We're told that it's fine to live without deeper belief, that truth is relative, and that spirituality is optional at best and oppressive at worst. But take a step back. The generations raised on these ideas are not flourishing. They are anxious, unsure, and often desperate for something real. Depression and despair are not always caused by chemical imbalance. They are often symptoms of spiritual vacancy. The soul knows when it's far from home, and this is not a call to religion for religion's sake. It's a call back to the source of your being. It's not about rituals or rules. It's about relationship. If you believe you are authored, then you must ask, why would the author write you into existence and then leave you alone? He wouldn't. But when we reject that connection, when we live as though we are our own source, we also cut ourselves off from the wisdom, guidance, and stability that come only from being spiritually grounded. This is why so many people feel the need to constantly reinvent themselves. The deeper their disconnection, the more they try to compensate with image, performance, or reinvention. But the self was never meant to be reinvented. It was meant to be restored, and restoration cannot happen apart from the restorer. You cannot find clarity by running further from the source of clarity. You can only find it by turning back. What we call confusion is often just spiritual noise, the hum of a soul trying to navigate life without its compass. When we re-establish our connection to our Creator, the noise begins to quiet, priorities shift, the pressure to impress fades, the desire to compare dies, because when your identity and purpose come from someone eternal, temporary voices lose their power over you. And that's the point where peace begins, not the peace that comes from everything going right on the outside, but the kind of peace that holds steady even when the outside is a mess. That peace is only possible when you're rooted in a truth that cannot be shaken. And that truth comes from spiritual connection, not theory, not opinion, but a living awareness of whose you are and why you're here. You cannot find yourself by avoiding your origin. You cannot build purpose on top of disconnection. Until that broken link is restored, even the best advice, the best strategies, and the best efforts will fall short, because the greatest need of the human heart is not to be seen by others, it is to be reconnected with the one who made it. Once we see that modern confusion is rooted in spiritual disconnection, it becomes clear that the path forward is not found by doubling down on self-reliance. The answer isn't more control, more self-curation, or more insistence on defining ourselves on our own terms. That's what got us lost in the first place. The freedom we crave, real inner freedom, does not come from total autonomy, it comes from surrender. Not the kind of surrender that leads to weakness or loss of identity, but the kind that connects you back to your origin and allows you to live out your truest self without fear or pressure. We have been taught that freedom means independence. That to be truly free, we must belong to no one, submit to nothing, and chart our own path with no higher authority than our own will. But this definition of freedom is misleading. It sounds liberating, but in practice it isolates. It disconnects us not only from others, but from the one who gives life its meaning, and soon the pursuit of total freedom becomes its own kind of bondage, a relentless effort to prove, protect, and define ourselves without help. We become enslaved to our own image, trapped by the need to perform, constantly reshaping ourselves to meet expectations we were never meant to carry alone. What if freedom is not the absence of limits, but the presence of the right ones? What if freedom is not about escaping all authority, but about submitting to the one authority who actually knows you, loves you, and wants your good? A train is most free not when it leaves the tracks, but when it runs on them. A fish is not free when it escapes the water, but when it thrives within its natural environment. In the same way, the human soul is most free not when it detaches from its Creator, but when it lives in alignment with the one who authored it. Surrender is not passive, it is active trust. It means letting go of the exhausting task of self-invention and receiving instead the identity and purpose already spoken over you. It means laying down your constant need to compare, compete, and control, and choosing instead to rest in a love that is not earned but given. And that rest, that rootedness, is where real freedom begins. Because when you no longer have to be the source of your own worth, you are free to simply live, fully, honestly, and with joy. This surrender is not an escape from responsibility. It is what gives responsibility its right shape. You still make choices, set goals, and live with intention, but not as someone trying to become worthy. You do it as someone who already knows they are. You are no longer driven by fear of failure or hunger for approval. You are moved by love, clarity, and calling. That is the kind of freedom that gives life depth and direction. It's important to recognize how radical this idea is in today's world. A culture that prizes individualism will tell you that surrender is weakness, that to yield is to lose, but in truth, surrender is the only way to stop fighting battles that were never yours to fight. It is the way back to peace, and peace, not pride, is the foundation of a strong identity. When you surrender to your Creator, when you acknowledge whose you are, you no longer need to scramble for validation. You don't have to create your own truth. You can live from truth itself. This shift also changes the way we relate to others. When you know you belong to something greater, you don't need to dominate, manipulate, or impress people to secure your place in the world. You are free to serve, free to love without fear, free to forgive, to speak truth, to take risks. The pressure to prove dissolves when your worth is already settled. The freedom found in surrender is not theoretical, it is deeply practical. It transforms how you work, how you relate, how you make decisions. It simplifies life in the best way, because instead of trying to be everything, you begin to live from the truth of who you were created to be. You don't need to wear masks or chase perfection. You can walk with integrity, knowing that the one who formed you also walks with you. And in the end, that's the paradox of identity. You don't find yourself by clinging to yourself. You find yourself by letting go. You don't gain clarity by looking inward alone. You gain it by lifting your eyes upward. The more you try to define yourself in isolation, the more confused you become. But when you surrender to the truth of whose you are, you don't lose your identity. You finally receive it. And with it, you receive the kind of freedom that no achievement, no applause, and no self-image can ever offer.